That's true vCIO, right? I don't think most MSPs are doing that. I think it's a harder inroad for most MSPs to get to that point. However, with vCISO, clients are not strategically thinking about the controls. They're just saying, we don't want to get hacked. How do we do that? It's a much lower barrier of entry. I'm just going to do my job because they don't listen to me anyway. And if the customer leaves, I don't care. Like, there's no ownership then at that point. By allowing people to customize it and keeping that culture alive, you're creating morale for the organization too. If you're looking to actually deliver cybersecurity the right way and actually grow this cybersecurity business, I believe that that's done through a vCISO program because I've lived it.
Welcome back to this episode of MSP Insider. I have been looking forward to this one. Joining me today on the episode is Jesse Miller. Jesse, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone who you are, what you do, and why the hell you do it?
Okay. So name's Jesse Miller, as you mentioned. I'm the founder of Power PSA Consulting and creator of the PowerGrid vCISO system. So what does all that mean?
Yeah.
Basically, we help MSPs package, price, and scale vCISO programs to start driving risk-led conversations for their businesses with their clients, right? So really, how do you build a vCISO program, make it profitable, and leverage it as a force multiplier for your cyber go-to-market, okay? This all started, I was the CISO at an MSP for about a decade and really fell on my face in a lot of ways when I built that program the first time. And so when I exited out of that, I kind of looked around and said, you know, what does the industry need and what am I good at? And I kind of had this idea for building this ops system for MSPs to build vCISO programs. And, you know, you do your market research and you look around and you say, well, okay, there's nobody else doing this. Is this a terrible idea? But no, I'm like, this is needed. I'm going to do it. And so I kind of took a flyer and we're about 2.5 years down the road. Right now we grew 350% last year and we're just helping a ton of MSPs. So it's an exciting time in the business.
Yeah, it's amazing. I always love having transitioned sides of the fence, right? I was an MSP for so long.
Yeah.
I love seeing other people who have sort of made that transition too, but end up with a community that will like go to war for you. Because I think that speaks so much more volume about the quality of what it is you do, the impact of what it is that you do. And while I'm new to the channel side and starting to see behind some of the curtain, so to speak, there, but like, I can say it. You may not say it because you're probably too humble, but like what I've seen is that you have this community that will just show up in droves that to me is like the exponent on the validity of what you're doing. And so just recognizing that up front is great. And hopefully the audience, you know, pays attention and picks up a couple of things. Because as you know, and as they've come to find out, the whole purpose behind this show is really to like shatter the echo chamber, so to speak, right? And to like break through the noise of just sort of the constant hum that exists in the channel. And before we get into that, the way that we open these shows is I'll actually ask you a question that the previous guest left behind. And then at the end of the show, I'm going to ask a question of you and you get to sort of drop a bomb on whoever's next too. But it's double blind. No one knows who's coming and no one knows who it came from. So you drew the lucky card, actually. The last guest that I had interviewed was Damian Stevens.
Okay.
And I loved the question that he left with. It was a great conversation. But his question was, and I got to read it so I don't butcher it, is what do you see as truly the top constraint holding MSPs back?
Wow. What do I see as the top constraint? That's interesting. I guess I would say, I'll start high level and then I'll dig in on it. But I think what I would say I see holding them back is comfortability. Right. So I think it's really easy in a lot of ways to get some sort of a business that makes you an income and just stop there because you don't want to step outside your comfort zone and do the things that's really required to grow. And so I think just being comfortable with where you're at, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, growth above all else. We don't want that. I don't think that's ethical and I don't think we should do that. But I think just being comfortable and not doing better for yourself and your employees and everything else because it's scary or uncomfortable to step outside those lines, I think can really just keep you stuck. So I guess that'd be off the cuff after thinking about it for 3 seconds.
Yeah, that's
I would
great.
say.
That's the whole point. It's ideally we get some sort of like provocative question that really makes you stop and think. And you actually had a few seconds of silence in there, which I love sitting into. So I loved your answer too, by the way, because what I found really during that journey at MSP, multiple MSPs, but probably more so in the last 6 months as a co-founder in a business, is like everything that you desire sits on the other side of your comfort zone, right? And it's not even that far past your comfort zone,
right?
But you'll perpetually and consistently push up against that boundary. And if you're willing to do that, everything else is literally just on the other side. Of that.
I think I'm just processing my answer right now, right? But I think I almost like answered for myself, right? Because that's true about me too. Is like what stops me from getting what I want is being comfortable and not being willing to take that kind of scary step or scary risk that I know has great reward on the other side of it, because I'm like, I'll worry about that next quarter, or I'll worry about that next year, right? And so maybe I'll point that back at myself as well and take that away.
Yeah, that's funny. I think the most beautiful part about sales, because the last 8 years of my MSP career was spent either as a sales rep or building, running, and managing sales teams. And to me, I like to categorize sales as like the absolute greatest personal development role you could ever possibly have. Wow. Should you choose to embrace it.
Yeah.
It makes you face everything internally and externally, to your point. So I'm not surprised you sort of claim your answer back on yourself, because it really resonates back into that thread of like, there's so much personal identity and psychology, insecurity, vulnerability, like all of them, right? We're basically walking textbooks when we're in that regard. And so I wonder, let's flip that back to a question to you too. Like, was there a defining moment in your progression, really kind of coming up on that technical and compliance component, where, a switch like that kind of flipped for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the MSP that I started at, I'll just tell you, maybe take you on a little journey here, is that I came out of carrier services from like global network operations as a contractor. So working large scale national telecom operations for switch builds and things like that. And after I got my Cisco networking degree, I went and met an MSP at the career fair and went and got hired at a 5-person trunk slammer. So you talk about
culture
worlds
shock
colliding, right? Is an interesting, but I was able to put my skills to good use and help them really succeed. So when they could answer your question, when they came to me about, what was this, 5 or 6 years later, and I was running the networking team and helping them build other different things, they said, hey, we want to build a managed security program. Can you do that? And I said, oh yeah, I've been successful at everything technical I've ever done in my life. Okay. So no problem. So built this really excellent enterprise level cybersecurity stack, accounting for all levels of the kill chain and everything else, and spent a bunch of time and resources building it out, and then just found out, oh, nobody wants to buy this. Whoops. And I think that's where a lot of MSPs kind of find themselves today, actually. But this is when I had to go back to the drawing board, and that's kind of when vCISO services saved the day. So so you talk about how did I come upon this risk and compliance and this why for cyber is that's what I went and started looking like. I'm bleeding cash. I'm failing. I've never failed before, right? That's a bad feeling. And I think people that are like high performers know that fear. So so I found this vCISO thing. I'm like, oh, there's a lot like vCIO. Like we could figure this out. So we built that program, and then I had to and then trying to get marketing and sales on board. They didn't want to hear it because they're like, we're making money selling managed IT. We don't care about that. Like
we don't want to risk this.
As like water rolls downhill, right? So it's like, we're selling managed services. We don't care about that. So had to then get clear on the value prop, build my own marketing, educate the sales team, educate the account teams, and dig into that world that I always said, salespeople don't, I'm technical. Somehow think I'm better than salespeople, right? And I'm married to a salesperson, by the way. So there's a little bit more of humble pie I got to eat. But and so in any case, that when I put that all together then and started understanding like what is copy, what is marketing, what are value pillars, what is value positioning, and how does that work, and how does that lead into how we deliver service and how we onboard the client. And it's actually a linked journey all the way through. It's not just a buying journey and it stops. It's a complete journey through the organization. So once that all came together about a year into this, that's when the unlock happened and we started really killing it with cybersecurity. I mean, we were selling in 2015 vCISO services to 12-person companies, nonprofits. Right. Like people say that's impossible to do today. And we were doing it then because
that's like the litmus test for can you or can you not sell, right?
Exactly. So I know that's a really long way to answer your question, but I wanted to kind of paint the picture of like how that came together. Right.
Yeah, no, I love it. And actually it does feed into one of the questions I wanted to ask before we even really got into like the meat of more of the MSP related ones. Cause I think this is an important thing I've observed from the outside in looking at you. I'm interested in what your answer is. What would you say the number one skill outside of the technical and outside of MSP and outside of security is that you weren't born into the world with that's changed your career the most?
I would say communicating. So I was, so we'll get deep here. So I grew up homeschooled. Okay. So I was a homeschool, like back when they didn't have co-ops and like homeschool kids were weird. Like now it's pretty normal. So I was a weird homeschool kid. And, when I was working for the phone company, I got laid off, after the .com bubble happened. And that's actually why I went back to school and ended up, working at an MSP. But, I was, my car got repossessed. I basically went bankrupt, lost everything because I couldn't find work, didn't have a college degree. And while I was going to school, there was a Bennigan's across the street from the airport or from the apartment I lived at. And I'm like, well, maybe I can go get a job there. So I went in there and a kid I went to high school with was the manager. I didn't know this. I walk in there and he's like, Miller, what are you doing here? So he gave me a job as a server. And then I learned that, to make money at this job, you have to learn how to talk to people and you have to learn how to relate to people and you have to learn how to make people like you or at least be likable. Right. And so that was kind of like turned this secret introvert on his head and forced him to learn how to communicate and relate to people. And that was a transferable skill. And that was kind of the unlock for the rest of my life and career. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not surprised that was the thing that you chose. Because I watch, again, I'm a huge observer. I'm like the most extroverted introvert that I'm aware of on the planet. And so like I soak in the world by observation. And then, I'm quite opinionated too, which is fine. But like, you got to kind of almost ask it sometimes for me to get it out. But one of the things I love watching specifically with you about communication is really your ability to communicate through the written word as well. Like it's very apparent. It's very obvious that like, you've put in some work on what I was expecting you to say actually was that copywriting might have been the skill that you came out with, but it's kind of all nested in that same one of communication.
Well, I'll dig into that because I think that's a later skill that I developed that builds on communication, but I think it's all tied back to the same thing. So again, I was gifted in that with the homeschool, we were classically educated with a classical education. And so when you think about like logic and rhetoric and like very formal ways of writing and communicating and understanding those deep concepts of logic, truth, and beauty, and how those basically build the entire world that we live in, when you look around and realize that that's the core of everything, then you just find that truth in whatever you're working on. Communication, copy being one way of doing that, and you use it ethically. You don't use it as a weapon, but when you do that, you can. It's building blocks for life, right?
Yeah, that's so. It's crazy, and yet again, not surprising that like you can deconstruct something like that as well. It really shows the depth of the depth of thinking, right? But the depth of experience that you have to apply towards some things. I think we kind of get conditioned in this day and age, certainly in the society as well. And you actually have the contrast there, right? As a homeschooled person versus a traditional education. So like you actually live the contrast, whereas the majority live the other side of that contrast where you just sort of function, exist, maybe see things at a surface level. This is way typecasting and it's not intended to do that, but
no, that's fine.
The intention of the depth that you have And even to mention that rhetoric is a component of copywriting, like that's a huge unlock if no one has studied
Right.
copywriting to look at. And rhetoric's like this thing that just gets associated as like political speak most of the time, right?
Right.
But there's a reason it gets associated that way, because of how you string together words to move people regardless of what the movement
Yeah.
is about. So
Yeah. And I'll say too, like, yeah, like if we build on that, right, and I'm talking, this is more formative, but then we move later on, and yeah, copywriting was something that was a newer skill. I don't think I really even tried to write my first piece of copy until maybe 3-4 years ago. Even I was doing it when like I said, when I was building marketing for the marketing team, I was doing it,
yeah,
but I never called it copy. I'm like, I don't know what copy is. I just like need to
sure.
write to convince people. It's
Yeah,
persuasive writing, right? So
right.
I was more, what's the word? Superfluous in the way I wrote. I wasted words, right? And I think
Yep.
that's one of the things about good copies. It doesn't waste words. So we do some
Mm-hmm.
training on this in the Power Grid, but
Yeah.
we talk about how copy, the game in copy is to seek to be as effective as possible in communicating with the least amount of words. That's the game. That's the game
Yeah.
right there. And if you can
Right.
do that well, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Not even going to add any points to that because it's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit then about you have security background, MSP background. At the timing at which all of this was going on, the market was sort of playing tiptoe with this horrible word called vCIO, which just sort of showed up somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And then you've been outspoken in the contrast again of like lean way into vCISO services if you're going to do anything. Just maybe help stake your claim, so to speak, in like the position that you have there,
Yeah.
and ultimately the why, like the depth
Yeah.
of the why.
So, and I would say it really depends, and because we don't have definitions for this, right? So,
Yeah.
I think I talked to plenty of MSPs that use vCIO as their vCISO. So they're doing true vCIO, right? And they have a vCIO program and they have like a cyber risk module for that. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, use the Power Grid components to do that. That's fine. But I think as a broad brush, most MSPs have account managers who are helping tactically execute an organization's strategy for technology. Whereas the organization says, hey, we want to buy this database or this CRM, or we want to implement this thing. How do we do that? You say, okay, well, we'll sell this for you. It's going to be these services. We'll plan budget for it. We'll work with you to do all that. And like, that's vCIO, but you didn't go to the organization and say, here's the 3 different CRMs in your industry. We think you should use this one because of these features that we think will give you a competitive advantage with the way you're executing your business model. Okay, that's true vCIO, right? And I don't think most MSPs are doing that. And I think it's a harder inroad for most MSPs to get to that point, right? However, with vCISO, clients are not strategically thinking about the controls. They're just saying, we don't want to get hacked. How do we do that? You have an opportunity. It's a much lower barrier of entry to go in and be strategic and say, okay, tell me about your business. Tell me about what you're doing, about what your plans are. Okay, here's the strategy for how you protect and plan about those. And immediately you've been placed at a strategic position without having to go in and understand the nuances of each little piece of what their business strategy for that technology is going to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I might have talked to you offline once about this. Otherwise, it's how I've thought about what I've seen of the way that you do what you do with the vCISO offering is like putting all of that time, energy, effort, skill, copywriting, these and like all the fundamentals that you have into what I see as like this paint by numbers version of being able to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And like paint by numbers is kind of taking me back to being when I was a kid, where it was like, you got the coloring book with the numbers in it, but it's literally like step by step sequential ordering, or let's call it IKEA furniture, right? Like you start with a flat box, but you end up with a crazy bedroom. And that's something to me is something, it makes it tangible, right? It makes it executable. It makes it doable, makes it real, makes it possible. Maybe is the best word for it, for an MSP to stand this up and be successful with it, rather than maybe the last 2 or 3 years worth of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt is sort of the approach that the industry tells you to take.
Yeah. And I think, like, just as encouragement for people who are thinking about it, I think again, if you have a vCISO cadence or vCIO cadence that's doing those things that I mentioned, and you're actually being strategic, you don't want to burn that down, right? Just add on to it. Be like, hey, we're going to add a security strategy component to this. Okay. So that's my point is to the paint by number. I call it it's like the reverse of the Pareto principle. Is I'll give you the 80% of paint by numbers, but I need you to pick the colors and decide where you're going to hang it up and what you're going to call it and sign your name to it. So you're going to take it that last 20% of the way. The last thing I want is to be super prescriptive and whitewash the personality or the identity or what I call the org DNA of your MSP. Like, you need to preserve that, because that's why you're in business, right? That's why your customers like to do business with you. So,
right. Let's talk about that for a second. It wasn't even on the topics of what I would go into, but it is a pet peeve and an irritation of mine. Is like, I was a part of 5 different MSPs over 7 different times over those 18 years. So like a fairly decent swath. And as a result, there were also various sizes, right? The smallest one was 4, the largest one was 125 people.
Yeah.
They were also at different stages of adopting the Kool-Aid from the industry, where it was like, we're going to be a true method shop, or we're going to be a C-level shop before it was Pack Seat Academy, or we're going to go in all in on OMLS as Sleek kind of a thing, right? And we don't have to call them out by name, but like the thing that I witnessed happen at each of the companies over the course of maybe 3 to 4 or 5 years was, as we relentlessly pursued the industry best practice standard definitions across the org, we didn't realize at the time that we were also recklessly abandoning our actual true core identity, right? The closer we shifted to all these best practices, the less like ourselves we ever became. And that's where those frustrating conversations with the clients would come in, or like, we used to do things this way, or the relationship was gone because the pursuit was to be the best in class, industry best practice. But nowhere in any of those platforms, at least in my experience, call me out if I'm wrong, but like, they didn't really have a section, to your point, whereas like the org DNA needs to stay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see it that way, or if you have encountered that, or if maybe that's what made it be a formal piece of your offering.
Being a part of that, watching that same trajectory is why I'm so passionate about that piece. So yeah, I think we're lockstep with our thoughts there. And I think those systems are great. All of the ones you mentioned, actually, I think they're going to help you create an EOS, whatever you pick, right? It's going to help you create a standardized method for doing things, but you also have to understand that a framework is just that, a framework. And, you have to put the flesh and the meat on that. Right. So
there's like the element that, that the 2 or 3 sentences you need to put on the whiteboard in your conference room, so that when you're in your strategy sessions, you don't lose it, is like, not to forget where you came from or why you started doing it. Like, there's a couple of those just like first principle typed phrases that you need to incorporate, because then it can be the lens that you focus, to your point, the structure through. Because you will benefit from adopting actual process, actual procedure, actual documentation, actual org structure, right? But just doing it so consciously and not subconsciously, I guess, is my end rant on
there's the other part of that too, is that for morale purposes, people are making it their own, right? So if it's like, well, hey, we don't think this is going to work because this is going to be a problem, and it's like, no, we're doing it this way because this is the way we do it. And then you start creating that enterprise atmosphere where people are like, well, I'm just going to do my job because they don't listen to me anyway. And if the customer leaves, I don't care. Like, there's no ownership then at that point. So that by allowing people to customize it and keeping that culture alive, you're creating morale for the organization too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That kind of is a great setup too for one of the other terms that you're either coined for. I know you for it. I don't know if everyone else does, but that Professor Perfection, right? So what is it about MSPs? Like, what's making MSPs chase perfection instead of practicality?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is just things that I made mistakes on. Like, I talk about it, be like, so don't do that again, Jesse, because that didn't work, right? But I think being someone who was like a technical rainmaker at the first part of my career, and now having transitioned to being a coach and a strategist and somebody who's a thinker and a vision guy, right? Not to say I don't do the other things, but understanding the balance that's needed there. I know for myself, that goes back to what I was talking about, launching that first cybersecurity program, is just obsessively tweaking the words on like a white paper product offer definition that nobody is going to read,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sales is
Yeah.
not going to read it. The customer is not going to read it. They're going to go
Right.
look at the picture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then launching it and being like, okay, now it's a perfect offer. It's
Mm-hmm.
perfect. Everyone's going to love it. And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, we don't like that.
Yeah.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
iterative and pragmatic processes are what move the needle. And it's a function of liking technology, and we like
Mm-hmm.
technology because there's defined rules, right?
Yeah.
It's true or
Mm-hmm.
false, binary, 1 or 0. I know exactly where I stand. There's no ambiguity. So it comes back to like inductive versus deductive types of approaches, right?
Yeah.
Technologists operate in a deductive world. There's rules, there's binary, it's yes or no. And if I make the right choice, I get the right outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, inductive is like I have to take kind of the moving parts that are coming at me and kind of make a decision with the best information I have, and then roll with the punches that come based on that decision and kind of iterate as I go. And that's where,
Yeah.
salespeople are comfortable in that inductive world. Forecasters are comfortable in that inductive world. So
Yeah.
I think that's Professor Perfection needs to get out of the deductive reasoning and understand that we live in an inductive world.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that people hear one of the most important parts of that from you too, is that iterative improvement is the name of the game, right? Like you don't have to go from 0 to 10 on that scale. Like it's just about getting one step closer to where you want to be than where you are. And then the second part that I also believe to be true in my experience through that is like, maybe it goes back to how you opened it too. Like you have to get over the fear of failure, right? And like accept that you're going to suck a little bit, or like you won't feel comfortable doing the thing, which might make you feel like you're going to suck at it. But if you just continue to put that one foot in front of the other, you don't stop, you sort of stumble your way there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was I going to say? I lost it. Now, well, we'll move on.
Yeah, no problem at all. One of the things that I wanted to talk through also was, really thinking back through that evolution, right? Like you found great success. Technically, you found great success through the, let's say, growth part of the business, and then have transitioned from being in it to being in it, but over it in a different way. Not over as an authority, but like over it as in you see a lot of it.
Right.
What have you been able to extract, observe, extrapolate, define, like whatever the right word is, common trends or traits or characteristics of the MSPs that maybe find their way to your program, but they lean in and they really find the success, right? And I guess the root of my question is, having done some consulting myself, like what is it about MSPs that are willing to pay for advice that they're unwilling to take? That might be a better way to ask it.
Oh, so that's interesting to me, and I'll never understand that. I think I do understand it. Is like I think, and this isn't just MSPs. This is business owners in general, right? Because I think a lot of MSPs deal with their clients doing this to them. Is like,
sure,
especially with strategic type of services like vCIO and vCISO, is hey, we're paying you a hefty fee monthly, and we still have problems. Like we're paying you to not have problems. And you're like, no, you're paying me to tell you how to solve your problems and show you the path to solve your problems.
Yeah.
You still have to go solve those problems, right? And so if I tell you how to solve that problem and then you say, no, we're not going to do it that way, we're going to do it this way. And then you expect different results. It's kind of like, well, all right. I mean, I guess I'm glad the check's clearing, but that's not fun for me because I am someone who is action oriented, right? So I want, and you talked about who's going to be who do I see that are most successful in the program? It's those MSPs that have a bias for action, the ones that don't have the professor perfection mentality, right? Like, oh, hey, I'm going to go I'm going to go through all this program. I'm going to iterate some stuff. I'm going to throw it out there, and and we're going to learn something, and we're going to come back, and we're going to come to office hours the next week and be like, hey, we tried this. And I'm like, okay, here's what you did wrong. You missed this. You didn't link this to this. Try this next time. And they're like, oh, okay. Then I come back. And then by about the third repetition of that, they're like, hey, we just closed this company. We just had this customer inbound. Hey, we've been doing the LinkedIn thing. And you know what? We're just getting inbound leads, which we never got before. People messaging us in DMs. Like, I'm like, guys, yeah, this works. You just do it. So,
right. Yeah. You just paint.
So I think that's the difference is like, you have to have a bias for action. And if you can never, you're never going to solve anything by just throwing money at it. You have to get your hands dirty, right? I actually did a workshop with Empath earlier today. And, I went through it and it's like, okay, here's all the things you need to do. This is a go-to-market motion for talking with cyber with your existing client base. I said, okay, now this is a 3-month process and you got to do like 4 or 5 things that require some work. So people are going to watch that. People are going to come to that and be like, oh yeah, go-to-market motion. I'm going to talk to cyber about all my clients. Oh wait, I got to dedicate time and resources for 3 months to do that. Yeah. That's what you got to do. But when you do it,
if you want the outcome, right?
You have the opportunity to double spend with a lot of your clients. But you got to go do it. So
yeah, that's huge. That was another thing that when I heard it, it really hit me. And then being responsible for leading growth teams, it really hit me. And that was, we talked a bit about how everything you desire is on the other side of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And yet I think there was another way of saying that, which was something to the effect of like everything that you desire is on the other side of the work you've been avoiding. And I saw a lot of that too when I was in the peer groups or leading peer groups and coaching or doing the consulting, where it's actually one of the characteristics I look for to make the decision, do I take this client on or not, is do they have a default bias for action or not?
Yeah.
Because imperfect action will win over like the addiction to knowledge every day of the week, right? I think one of the things that like let's call it maybe like the consumerization or the consumption of knowledge, like between those two things, the way digital information has become available over the last 5 years, if you will, has created this illusion of progress by consuming information, even if it's helpful.
Yeah.
But it's not at all helpful if it's not applied, right? And that's where the action comes in.
Right.
And so, one of the tricks that I had to apply to myself, especially when I was moving into sales and was uncomfortable doing it because I sucked at it, was a 3, 2, 1, go like mechanism in my brain, right? Like I knew the thing that I didn't want to do. So as soon as I identified that like I was going to avoid this thing, I would literally count down in my head, 3, 2, 1, go. And like, maybe it was picking up the phone. Maybe it was sending the email I didn't want to send. Maybe it was getting up and going and sitting down next to the person I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with. So, you've had a lot of maybe like evolutions and expansion of roles and those kinds of things. Did you come up with any of those like personal hacks that you would use too, similar to 3, 2, 1?
Yeah, no one cares.
Man,
I love that. Like, that's what always gets me is like, you get up and you're not feeling great. No one cares. Like, you're not on your A game today. Don't feel like going talking to that client. No one cares. Like,
no one cares. Yeah.
I mean, I know I didn't come up with that, but I always hear that in my head. It's interesting. As you know, we have the little hobby farm. And so right now we're in Minnesota. It's a negative temps, like negative 10 feels like negative 23. And I got to go out to the barn and do the chores in the morning. And you want to talk about not wanting to go get on the other side of that when you're warm and cozy with your coffee. You're like, well, things are going to die if I don't go out there. So,
you raised the stakes a little bit in that regard, right?
You just got to do it, right? And so it's like 15 minutes of work, but just like you got to put on the bibs, you got to get the face mask, got to go out there and do it, and then you feel better after you do it. But it's like, nobody can, like, not you got to. You're sick, the family's sick, and the water's frozen. No one cares. Get out there and do it.
Yeah, that's great. It made me think of a phrase that one of my coaches had given me one time. I think I even said this online recently because of a post, but it came out of an evolution of Simon Sinek's golden circles, right? Like you got to start with why and lead with why. And the coach that I had after that had said, it isn't so much like people don't care what you do or until they understand why you do it. He rephrased it and said, people won't care what you do until they understand that they are the reason why you do it.
Right.
And like that to me was a huge unlock, maybe for the copy, but really for like positioning and messaging and communication.
Yeah.
Back to your point earlier too, like I don't know why like no one cares made me think of that, but like
Yeah.
that's the polar component of it, right? They don't care until they understand why they are the reason why you do what you do.
Yeah.
And that little tiny like tweak in positioning was just such a game changer for how I saw the world and could show up on the growth side of businesses, to maybe connect that dot, right? Like they aren't going to care unless you make them care.
Yeah.
The other way, there's another coach that said something similar where it was like, you hear that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, which might be true, but your task as a marketer or a salesperson is to, they say, be the salt cubes.
Right.
Right. Like you can make a horse drink if you give it salt cubes when it's standing right over the water. So like you have to find the right way to position yourself as the salt cube to like get the action that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing to that is, as we were talking, it's, and the other thing I would say is that I'm Finnish by descent. So I don't know if you know the word sisu. Are you familiar with this term? So a little bit of history. The Finns are like, I would guess they've been kicked around by the Russians, by everyone, right? So I don't know if you know about the Winter War, but Russia one year invaded Finland. And Finland, as you know, is much smaller, much weaker than Russia, but they actually held them off through all of this. So there's this word sisu in Finnish that doesn't have an English equivalent or translation, but it roughly means extreme grit or fortitude in the face of overwhelming or impossible odds. And so the sisu of like, no matter how dark or impossible things look, you always try your hardest until your dying breath, right? That's the way you could think about it. And I think that kind of Finns would claim that it's part of their DNA. So I think sisu would be another term. So go look it up if you're watching this.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let's go back a bit because I don't know that I gave it enough time, and I want to get your take on it too. Let's go back to the concept of the echo chamber that we have as a broad community, both sides.
Yeah.
The MSP community traditionally, I mean, it loves sharing best practices, which we talked about, right? But the real question I wanted to unpack from you is, which recycled idea makes you want to scream every time you hear it?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I guess it's interesting because it's the business I'm in, but when I hear trusted advisor, I guess it's been used to death, and I use it. So it's like I use it. I'm like, oh, why did I say that? Like, I shouldn't use that word. But the idea of being a trusted advisor, I think, is we got to stop talking about it. And we got to just do it, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how that fits into the echo chamber, I think, the information sharing is like, we just, go deliver this QBR, this SBR with your client and talk about these things and get integrated in their business and ask them how they make money and do it. And like, guys, it's so much more than that, right? It's so much more than that. And I mean, there's some really good voices who give really good advice on this, like Alex Farling from Empath, Chris Ryan from vCIO University. They teach how to be real, do that right. But I think there's so many other people that are just like, hey, no, go run your QBR and check these boxes off. And now you're a trusted advisor. And people are like, why isn't this working? And it's, I don't know, it's kind of like dishonest in a lot of ways because we're telling them we got the it's like, well, you want to really get into a hot take. It's like it's like the food industry in the US, right? It's like we keep giving people this junk food and we like, why do people keep getting cancer? And why do people keep getting sick? Oh, geez, I don't know. Maybe because you've been feeding them red number 3 for the last 50 years. And
maybe because none of the ingredients are recognizable.
Right, exactly. So I guess off the cuff, that's probably what I would say is that term, don't love it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. One of the others similar to that is the concept of thought leader. This is what another coach had given me too, is like the issue with how thought leadership has evolved in the space, and not this space, but in general, is that by definition, fundamentally, like most people, maybe this is a hot take, most people can't claim the definition because it requires 2 things: an original thought and people that are willing to follow you for it, right? Rather than to this point of like beating the same drum. And so kind of similar to that, has the same vibe, right? As we don't want to be your trusted advisor. It's like, well, how about you actually just go through the right motions of caring and asking the right questions and seeking to understand, and then finding the value for them that they can't find on their own. And then they're going to trust you because of the outcomes that you can deliver, but you don't need to have like the badge of honor title strapped on.
I'm I'm a nonconformist by nature, like almost to a fault. So like my barometer if I should stop doing something is like if everyone else starts doing it. I'm like, oh no, red alert, I need to get out of this. And that's actually to a fault. Like that can be that can be bad.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like there's sometimes to ride the trend, and there's other times where it's not the room you want to be in anymore. Right.
Right. So I think there's some of that going on because this is like a small corner of the technology industry. Like as an industry, we're small. And so I've always tried to look outside, and I think there's a lot of knowledge to be taken. Well, here's the thing. It goes back to that, like, I just want to pay for a system and I don't want to do any work. Right. So I always try to look outside and say, like, what are other industries doing really well, and how can I apply that to my industry, right? Because that's where I want to. What did I always say to my teams back in the day? I said I want to evaluate in a vacuum and make decisions with consensus, right? So I want to go evaluate an idea on its own merits and not almost without any external influence of like everyone else is doing it this way. It's just like, what do I think about this? And then I want to go ask smart people and poll the audience and say, okay, here's what I came up with. Does this match with what everyone else is saying? And like, oh, it does match, or it matches 3 out of 4, but there's this one thing. Oh, you know what? We haven't been thinking about this. This is what we need to be doing. This is the missing piece. And so I think there's other industries that we can pull from, you know, SaaS being the one I really have always kind of as a default gone and looked at is like, what are enterprise SaaS companies doing for marketing, for sales, for operations? And what are the frameworks that they're using? But then understanding that we don't have these wide global spanning companies. So we want to take that framework and maybe take some pieces out of it, but take the 1 or 2 good things out and then integrate those and synthesize it with the way we're doing things and come up with something new and better. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that approach. I don't know if this is an original thought or if I had picked it up along the way, but I like to call what you're describing as right angle targeting. Like, how can I go find something that might not even be tangentially related, but it's sort of proven somewhere else, and then pick it up and move it, testing it, thinking through it, original thinking, critical thinking, first principles thinking. But like, how can I go find the thing that sits between where I want to be and where I am, and like leverage it as sort of that right angle way of getting there by like adding it as an ingredient, or extracting, you know, the other way I guess I call it too is like success leaves clues. So like, where is the definition of success as I currently seek it? Okay. Go distill that down to something that's transferable, and then to your point, like transplant it or plant it into the business and grow it out from there. Which is actually easier to do in a digital footprint world than it ever has been before. Right. I could give some easy examples there, but I want to ask a different question instead to kind of pivot a little bit again, kind of on the heels of like that best practices component, right? If you could erase one piece of conventional MSP wisdom from existence, what would it be?
What would that be? Packages.
Packages. Okay. Yeah. Let's go down that path a little bit then. What is it about packages that makes you want to eradicate them?
I think it creates, it's similar to the whole thing of like scalability and groupthink, right? I don't think packages are inherently bad. I think you need packages. I'm not saying do break fix work or whatever, but I think especially, and this might be, I'll admit this might be in my corner of the small corner that we all live in, is because we're talking vCISO and risk. You can't package that, or it would be completely outrageous. So for example, things like vulnerability management and incident response don't fit into packages. Like, oh, what can you charge me per user to give me unlimited incident response if I got a breach? I'm like, I could charge you like $2,000 a user to cover my cost, right? Like, I guess like that doesn't work. So like, I'm much more of a fan of a package for your default or low watermark that includes like all your MSP stuff and like your base level of security services. And then that includes vCIO and vCISO or however you're packaging that. And then past that, we're going to operate because we've now, you're paying us for that true strategic advisor. We've carved out spend specifically in our business model to have a strategic resource help you pick those point solutions that you need. And then we're balancing now a healthy blend of managed services and professional services through projects to create a healthy MSP, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This idea may have come from someone else, but the person that I've heard say it so eloquently enough times that I associate it to him is David Powell. I've seen him talk several different times. And one of the things that I like when he brings the analogy out is the evolution of markets and how they go through cyclical processes of bundling and unbundling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, he gives great examples. He can tell the stories way better than I can. But what I was hearing when you were saying that is almost a very similar kind of concept where whether it's not mindlessly following the leader, that's not how I'm not trying to diminish. It's just like the way a package sort of comes and then someone hears that someone's having some success with it, right? Whether maybe it's a peer group, maybe it's a great stage pitch, whatever it is, like we chase what it is we think we wanted to. And it's because we believe or feel that we want that outcome as well. But I really liked what you said, where it's actually about going and having the real conversation with the end user, the end customer, and figuring out like what is their success criteria, and then what's the right point solution to get them the best possible result, even if it's outside of one of your packages.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it like needs to be outside of your supportability or your stack or your skill set or any of that. Like I'm not advocating that or advocating for that, but yeah, I guess that's how I felt when you were saying that, as like that cyclical nature of like, whether it's groupthink, whether it's something else, just watching the bundling and unbundling of things happen.
Yeah, no, you're right. And when you brought that up, I didn't know that name, but I've heard that concept, and I think it's right. Is that it's you know, it's the cyclical nature of like, how do we differentiate is we do things the way people aren't doing them, and that means doing them the way they used to do them. But I think the thing is we constantly learn and improve, and so it's like a constant overcorrection and then move back to the middle. So it's like we're break fix, so that was terrible. Now we're all MRR because we're so averse to break fix. That's what you need to do. Get away from break fix. And then you're like, oh, that actually doesn't work. So we need to like come back some here, and like we'll eventually, you know, find our equilibrium there as an industry.
Yeah. I love listening to Matt Lee talk about that when he talks about that, because he specifically on the AI train right now, like he's like, when humans release a new technology, the general process that it takes is that we build it, we leave it ungoverned until it kills a lot of people, and then we pull it back in, right? And then like on its second or third iteration through is sort of where like it's figured itself out.
You get it right.
And you know, again, he says it far more eloquently than I do. But one of the things that I've got to extract out of you before I lose the time too much is, well, first of all, before I go to that question, you've certainly earned the right to be as shameless as you'd love to be on this call about like this Jesse Miller guy. He's obviously got some depth. Some of the things that he said is interesting. I didn't know about the vCISO stuff before. Like, what would you like the audience to know about you, where they can find you, and for what reason?
Oh, yeah. So I guess what I'd like them to know about me is, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but if you're looking to build a trusted advisor relationship. No, I'm kidding. No, if you're looking to actually deliver cybersecurity the right way, that makes you have the right conversations with clients, that takes away the sleaziness or the FUD and makes it easy to have those risk conversations with your clients and actually grow this cybersecurity business that everyone's telling you should be able to grow, but seems to be elusive. I believe that that's done through a vCISO program because I've lived it, and it gives you the why for cybersecurity. And that's what I teach MSPs to do. We do that through a full ops system, which is the Power Grid vCISO system. And you can go check that out at powergryd.group. Any questions? I'm always on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. /SecOps Warrior, SECOPS the word warrior, and drop me a DM, or you can fill out the contact form on the website, and we'll get a hold of you one way or the other.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also, I'll re-summarize it too. If you're interested in becoming a thought leader on industry best practices and groupthink, then follow either one of us on LinkedIn, and that's where you're gonna get the information. All right. So before we let you off the hook, we've got to ruin somebody else's day. And so the question I have for you, I'll broadly ask the question. If I need to sharpen it, I will.
Okay.
But what do you have a question that you would love to leave behind for the next guest?
Okay. If you could delegate your primary responsibility today, or let me rephrase that. Mm-hmm. If you had one major responsibility that you're dealing with today that you could delegate, which responsibility would that be, and why do you want to get it off your plate?
Oh, I can't wait to drop that on whoever walks into it. That's such a good question, especially on the fly, which is one of the reasons I love doing it this way. No preparation. We just unpack it. Jesse, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like we did everybody a service by having them trade some time for the knowledge that you shared.
Thanks, man, for having
one
me.
Of the things that I heard pretty recently, and it's really kind of sat with me, is, you know, ideally you come to this show, something like that, and you can take the wisdom and then leave room for the tactics, right? Like execute it your own way. But hopefully there's some wisdom that we left behind for anyone that listened, and then and they're default action takers, and they lean straight into it. So
thanks for having me on. I didn't get enough chance to say like how much I respect what you and Sift are doing. So I know that's, you know, that you're the host, but I do want to take that opportunity is that, for those that don't know, when I met Jeff, he said, I'm not a LinkedIn guy.
Yeah. so true.
And now he's just crushing it. And like, I look forward to his posts and his videos. So you got to go follow Jeff if you're not, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jesse. And since you don't have a hard stop, we'll unpack a little bit of the story since the recording thing's still rolling. But I was not a LinkedIn guy. I wasn't a social media guy at all. I've got some accounts. Like I joined Facebook when you still had to have a .edu account way back in college, and like it still exists, but I don't know the last time I posted, years ago at this point, right? I'm just not a big social guy. I'm an extroverted introvert. So this random night, and I don't even remember why. There was no reason for me to do it, but I took out my phone. I had LinkedIn on it because I had to manage my company page at the time, right? So every once in a while I was getting notifications. And I got a notification for this guy named Jesse Miller. And the preview was just right enough to like have me as a hook, which goes back to your ability to write copy. But it read something to the effect of like, to all my MSP people, if you're interested, or I have a friend who has a vendor that's building a product that has something to do with voice to CRM. And at the time I was at the MSP, I was rebuilding my sales org, which actually included rebuilding the tool stack to support it. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting and unique, right? And one thing led to another. You made the introduction. You handed me off to Danny Wolf with Audience First, and then she made the introduction to the SIF team for me. And then, the rest has been history. I had a couple of user interviews. They had interviews over 100 MSPs at the time, still trying to determine like product market fit. And then once we talked, I got a call back like 3-4 days later. Hey, we want to dive deeper into some of these things you said. Great. All right, fine. And like I said, I got opinions, and I have so much scar tissue from doing it for so long. Not because I'm great and not because I'm amazing, because I made a lot of mistakes. Like I made a lot of bad choices and a lot of wrong choices along the way because I default to action too. Anyway, that's why I'm passionate about like being open and honest, and sometimes flagrant when I get passionate about like the things that are in this world. And so that turned into one user discovery call, 2 user discovery calls. And then James called me and said, hey, I need to buy like a huge block of consulting hours from you because it's clear that we need to go like way deeper into solving this problem. So I did that. and everything just kind of naturally evolved from there. The MSP that I was with went through an equity event, actually the evening of the morning, where James called me and said, "Have you ever thought about being a founder before?" So I went all the way from user discovery to consultant to co-founder, all because I hate social media and I saw Jesse Miller post online, and then kind of taking that all the way through full circle, even though why we got to record this today was the first event the SIF team went to as a team in the space was IT Nation in November, December. It's hard to remember now. November. November. And we had just got done having a conversation with two executives at PAX 8. And like, actually we were in the middle of the conversation. Jesse Miller I see the mustache. He came around the corner and we're sitting in the lobby of that place. And I literally almost got up in the middle of the conversation because like I've been primed so long. Like when I see you the first time, I'm going to walk up and give you this huge hug because it's changed everything. And I've never been more fulfilled. I'm having so much fun. That what we're doing is so exciting because of the impact that we can have. And I think what I told you when we were standing there, which is what I'll say again, is like, you never really do know like what that one post can do for someone. Right. And to me, like I said, I'm on it now and I post every day and I'm commenting and all that kind of stuff, but I'm still sort of that closeted, like introverted extrovert. Like I don't want to be out necessarily I should say I've evolved to enjoy it because I also found that it allows me a avenue to give back to the industry that's given me everything too. And I learned so much. So like, I love putting out the teaching content and like, here's what's going on and here's what I learned and here's why I learned it and how I learned it. And none of that would be here for anyone. And neither would this show if it wasn't for Jesse Miller.
I went back and looked at that post and I remember we don't need to go, like, we'll go down a rabbit hole with this, but I remember I went back and looked at it and I was like, that's crazy to think.
Yeah, right.
Because it was something like, it was like, hey, MSPs, want a chance to shape the next sales revenue engine for your industry? That. And I was like,
and I'm like, go back to copywriting, right? You put that post out into the ether, and I'm sitting there rebuilding a sales org from scratch. And the reason it's scratch was because we closed so much business operations, shut down the sales org, and I had to decouple it. And so like ops couldn't keep up with the growth. And so we stopped sales and I sort of deconstructed and reconstructed it. So like the copy hit perfect, right? I was a sales leader at an MSP looking to build the next generation tool to actually solve the problem of like, what if everything that we said just automatically went to the systems that run our business?
Right.
Like, well, what if? Right?
Is that talking to me? Funny story. I'll tell you one more. We could go all day here, but so it's just another random post that I put, and I was like, imagine this: you just got a deal for 273 endpoints, and they had this, and this. Like I was just writing some copy, right? But they're asking about vCISO, and you don't have your vCISO program fully formed. So I had an MSP reach out to me, and they're like, "Who'd you hear about our deal from?" And I'm like, "Dude, I made that up."
Yeah, that's so good. And the silver lining in that, and then I'll put a pin in it, is like a copywriting component was I heard it from Dean Jackson, but it was someone else, and I forget because it was one of the earlier ones, but it was to enter the conversation that's already happening in your prospect's mind or in the reader, the audience's mind. Like that's where you need to write your copy from. And I've never forgotten that one either. And so for like the MSPs, and this will be the last point for MSPs that still don't have an ICP or a TCP or whatever you want to call it, because you're like the best IT service for SMB, like that's not good enough. Because if you can't have that one conversation with the one persona solving one problem with the one specific solution, then you're making this so much harder for yourselves than it has to be versus when you nail the messaging, right? So anyway, now we'll sign off for real. Jesse, again, I appreciate you sticking around to tell a little bit of that story too. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I really enjoyed it. So